Okay, so I want to talk a bit about why you should consider the mood or theme of your game before you start making your art. In order to illustrate why this is so important, we're going to make this small scene set in hell. Having a well-delivered mood and theme does a lot, not only in giving a good first impression, but also having that impression last. I still have nostalgic moments thinking back to Abe's Odyssey, and that is in large part due to how well it managed to set the tone for the game. If I was to describe this game in a sentence, I would say it's a dark and gritty puzzle platformer with a lot of charm, where you play as this sympathetic slave called Abe. Each word in that sentence is something that the game has to deliver on and make me think and feel. The reason I say it's relatively dark and gritty might conceptually be quite simple. It's a fairly realistic rendering of a scene with a moderately depressing story and setting. On the other end, I also say it has a lot of charm because you're playing as this kind of weird, quirky little guy that talks and walks kind of funny. This is simple enough for me to describe, but if the game developers really want to convey these feelings and thoughts, it has to do that in all aspects of the game. It's when we consider this fact that we are starting to see how setting a mood might become tricky. When I develop an art style for my game, I want it to look good and be easy to make. But frankly, my art style is kind of cute and simple. And if I try and have a dark and gritty storyline, my art style would be so simple that it would undercut and work against that story. So something as simple as what your game is about will force you down a specific path in terms of not only art style, but also music, gameplay, and dialogue. A lot of it comes down to setting the expectations of the player. A bullet hell like Neon Abyss sets the expectations of fast-paced combat with lights and crazy effects flying around, whereas a game like Gris sets the opposite tone of a slow and artistic puzzle platformer. Both of these games have great art styles, but more importantly, the art style of Neon Abyss works for a bullet hell, but doesn't really work for an artistic puzzle platformer. For an even clearer example, we can look at Hollow Knight. It's a non-linear platformer, so part of the design of the game is that the player should feel slightly lost, but eager to explore. And when you start the game, you're dropped into this empty desolate place with a few bugs. The wind and plants rustle, and you stumble upon this small town, where you can sit down and rest. And as you continue, you stumble upon this big bug kingdom. Compare that to the first impressions of Skelemania. We start as a skeleton on this dirt plane. Then we get to this area that is completely empty, but kind of looks like an abandoned lab. You continue on and you stumble upon a lush autumn forest. Then you see a spider or two, and now the enemies are dinosaurs. Now, not to say that this necessarily looks bad, I don't think it does. But one of the main difficulties with a lot of non-linear platformers is that they start kind of slow, and because of that they can be a bit difficult to get into. But that makes it extra important to convince the player that it's worth to explore. This feels a bit constructed and random. I'm not quite sold on a storyline here, and because of that I get less inclined to explore it. I realize with this example that it might seem as if I'm saying this environment doesn't make sense, but I'm not. I'm just saying there's a risk of losing the interest of players if you don't make it clear early on what your game is about and what it is that is cool about your game. And the first impressions of this game is kind of odd where you just spend 10 minutes walking around in empty environments. That first impression is extremely important. This is why you see a lot of games front load the interesting parts of their game, like the Night Witch, where you start super powerful for the first 5 minutes and then you go back to being kinda weak. Now I kinda know how the game will be later on, and I'll be more inclined to endure the slow start. Frankly, if you've seen more than one of my videos, you would know I do this as well. I almost always start my videos with a short frame of my game art, me drawing that art, a short frame of me, and a short frame of another game. That way you will immediately kind of know the structure of the video. Either you like it or you don't, but at least you know what you're getting. And with an introduction like this one in Skelemania, I'm just kind of sitting and wondering if this game will eventually get fun. If you truly understand what it is that the player is going to find interesting about your game, and you show it as early as you can, well, they still might click away, but at least they gave your game a fair assessment. And at least for me, a Metroidvania just doesn't work as well if it starts out feeling kind of empty and constructed. But it probably fits better in simple platformers like Super Meat Boy or Getting Over It. Now, as a genre, I don't think these games are really locked into a specific art style, but they are expected to be simple. So we aren't getting any minced lore or storyline. Yum King is about reaching the top to find a girl. Super Meat Boy is about getting to this girl. Celeste is about climbing this mountain. And even though a game like Celeste does have some story elements, it's fairly simple and easy to grasp, and doesn't get in the way of gameplay. But even here we can see some differences in feel and expectation. Celeste has this story about persevering through challenges, and so even though it's quite a difficult game, it's on your side in that struggle. Compare that to Jump King, where it almost teases you as you fail. But if we look further, we can see that gameplay-wise, it's a platformer where you get to take your time and think and really regret your mistakes when you fail. And if we look at the environment, it's almost completely still, placing you in this slow but tense state. On the other end, we have precision platformers like Run, where you are being chased by this black cloud, and here the background is more dynamic with more particle effects. What we need to think about is how to ensure that each artistic choice we make actually fits the game we're making. If we're making a dramatic game like Ori, making funny fourth wall breaking references is probably bad. whereas an over-the-top roguelike might benefit from those same types of jokes. So now we talked a bit about the importance of making each choice serve the mood or theme of your game. So let's jump into actually making our scene. The game I want to make is a simple precision platformer with this demon character stuck in hell, kind of similar to the games we talked about earlier. We're going for a simple storyline, and the game shouldn't take itself too seriously. We're going to begin with making a quick starting area to test our style and mood. And the reason for doing this is just to get a sense for the assets I need to make and how I'm going to stage the scene later. I'll start with this pillar, and I'm just going to make lots of small rock blocks from top to bottom. And then as soon as the pillar starts to look a bit like how I want it to, we get to one of the first actual choices we need to make. Instead of going this dark and gritty kind of serious tone, we go for the opposite with saturated strong colors. We can also go for more dynamic colors, so we make hell but cute. For the platform you walk on, we just take the pillar and flip it to save time, and then we make some boulders and blocks. Basically, I'm just looking at my initial sketch and making some assets to match it. But once we have those simple things, we might make something like a sword and some skulls to aid in the setting, making it look a bit more like hell. But even though we add skulls, we make them look a bit cute and silly. This is not enough though. If we really want to give the idea of a difficult platformer that kind of makes fun of you, then we should perhaps make something silly, like a demon in a pot. And even though this is completely static at the moment, it can give us an idea for whether it works or not, and then we can animate it later. Then we're making these platforms here, and these are going to have a strange mechanic that I'm currently testing out. And since they have a special mechanic, they can't just be regular blocks. Instead, I'm going to make these silly demons on the platform, which I will also animate in the future. So by having the idea from the get-go of what kind of mood we want to have, it can help us guide the assets that we're making. I'm not really thinking and being creative here. I'm just having a very simple problem-solving process. What would make this hella-like place a bit silly? And even though we're not actually finalizing that idea here, we're at least planting the idea for it. And now we just need to stage all the assets similar to this small sketch we made. We obviously place some of the things like the skull and the demon in the foreground. And then we add some atmospheric perspective and a background blur. Add some particle effects and we get it a bit more dynamic. And now it actually looks kind of decent. And even though it's rough, I actually managed to make this in 7.5 hours, where 4.5 hours was spent staging the scene. So it only took 3 hours to draw. And I think one reason for this is that I never actually had to make any active choice. Getting an idea for your game early will not only ensure that you don't send mixed messages to your player, but it also helps you know what assets and enemies you need to make. And in this case, we went for a very simple style. We made nothing revolutionary, but it's still important to consider that each choice was made with the game in mind. I personally kind of view it like we're going from point A to point B. And if we're making a precision platformer, having heavy lore is like walking in the opposite direction. It's easy to think of things that in your head are cute and interesting or funny, and then implementing it without ever considering if it's actually a good choice for the game you're making. That is not to say that you don't have considerable freedom in what you make. Aitor is a Metroidvania with a considerable different mood from Hollow Knight, but it's still internally consistent and beautiful. I play it and I can see what they're going for. And so in my case, it's not like I'm going to change art style. I can make this quickly, but it also means I have to accept that I can make some design choices work, whereas other choices simply wouldn't. Oh, and this video is kind of similar to another video I made called Why Taste is More Important Than Drawing Skills, but I still felt like I wanted to touch a bit on how you can actually use this thought process when making your art. And the idea of kind of front-loading the important elements of your game, so that you show the nice aspects of your game as early as possible. Thanks for watching. Bye.